Welcome to the second episode of Fútbol y Periodismo, or Football and Journalism. We are here today with Claes Andersson, who is a Champions League commentator for the Scandinavian broadcasting network NENT Sport. As it is our goal, we would like to gain insight on how is it to be a sport journalist in Europe and to discuss some of the most trending topics in football nowadays. So let's begin. Klaus,
Yeah.
firstly, thank you very much for your time. And the first question of our episode is always when did you decide to become a sport journalist?
It kind of fell on me. I was working in another TV production, doing like entertainment TV, that kind of stuff. And then an old colleague of mine started working for TV3, and I just asked them if they did have sports, and they said, yeah, sure. And they were interested, and I said, yeah, of course I am. Well, I had a chat with the boss, and he was happy to take me in. So I was actually starting working as an editor for the Champions League about 20 years ago. So it's been a while, but I can't say that I had any childhood dreams about working with sports journalism. It's just one thing led to another, and I'm really happy to be where I am at the moment.
So, is football the most popular sport in Sweden? How often do the fans watch it?
Oh, by far, the most popular sport in Sweden. I would say ice hockey is really close. But if you compare the Swedish national team in football play versus the hockey team, I would say it's more football. But I would say also ice hockey is very popular in Sweden. It maybe engage a little bit more of the people who's not that super interested in sports, then because it involves more goals, maybe more action versus football. Well, maybe sometimes you need a bit more of understanding of the game to appreciate everything about it. But football is the biggest sport in Sweden, absolutely.
And we would like to also know about the journalism in Sweden around football. So is there football debate shows like every day of the week in Sweden?
No, it's the landscape is a bit changing from where you had when I grew up, you couldn't watch football once a year, twice a year, maybe the national team and the European Cup final. From now, you can watch football every day. We as NENT, we broadcast Premier League, Bundesliga, Champions League. We have the French league, the Dutch league, the Scottish league, the Danish league, and I probably forgot someone as well. And then you got other channels. They have the Italian football, the Spanish football, the Swedish football. So basically, you can sit every day and watch football. So it's an ongoing talk about football every day. It's a lot of podcasts coming. That's a big trend in Sweden. That there's a lot of podcasts where you discuss football. We have one, and there is plenty of podcasts, and maybe about Swedish football, about English football, about Spanish football, football in general. So, but TV shows where there's a debate. No, not in like a debate climate, but every time we send like Saturday and Sunday when we broadcast Premier League, we have a studio where we discuss about the game. After the game, we have interviews, and so in that sense, I would say basically more or less every day. So, and then you got newspapers, and a lot of Swedish people read English papers as well. So the interest in football is huge, and it's getting bigger and bigger. And I think we're a bit behind in Argentina, where it's been for a long time. We don't have like newspapers, especially for football. We have daily newspapers, but they are all sports. So it's football, cross-country skiing is very big during the winter. You got ice hockey and other sports. You got some websites that are just basically about football, but it's getting bigger and bigger. But I would say that the podcast is one of the stands out at the moment, where people have more discussions about football.
Are those podcasts in Swedish or in English?
Swedish. They are in Swedish, but for example, I host a podcast that's mainly about Premier League, and we have interviews with English people and English players and managers. So that's not a huge problem, because most people in Sweden at least understand English very well. So that's not a problem. It's like, oh, we can't listen to this because it's English. But the podcast that people make are in Swedish, but people listen to a lot of English podcasts.
And can you describe to us how a regular match day is it to you as a commentator?
Oh, well, everyone has this own way of preparing, and I do my teams. For example, I'm doing the Premier League. Then I do all the players. I prepare all the players before the season starts. So I get the name, number, prior clubs, national team, last year's statistics, and I have that. So that I keep all year long. That takes a bit time to do. So you try to do that before the season, and as you know, players change quite late sometimes, so you have to wait. But then before a game, I would say I spend couple of hours preparing the regular stuff, place in the table, last game, injuries. Then I try to find some stats from different corners. I try to read a lot of newspapers. And if I, during the week, find an interesting story about the teams I'm going to do in the weekend, I just mail it to myself. And then on game day, I pick that up and I write down what's quite interesting, and sometimes I don't use it. If the game is really good, then I don't have time. But I like to tell a story about if I can find an article about a player. For example, I was doing Manchester City last week, and I find a really interesting article about Phil Foden, about how he changed, how he's now started taking his diet more seriously. He took a sprint coach. He put a goal in his garden, so he's training in the garden when he's home, and things like that. When it's time, you can tell that kind of story. And then obviously you have all the stats that you can find. But I listen to podcasts myself. I listen to English radio every day. So when I'm home preparing, there's a sports channel in England called TalkSport, which is basically they talk about English football all day long. So then I'm up to date. What's the topic in England? What's trending? They also have, which is quite nice, people from different countries. So they have an English guy, for example, Tim Wickery, who lives in Rio de Janeiro, and he gives a heads up what's the topics talking about in South America. So then then you know a little bit story, what's going on there. So basically, for me, I would say and I think it's basic for everyone. It's not like, oh, I'm doing Manchester City, Aston Villa tonight. I'm preparing for that, because you read all week but what's going on for a long, long time. So it's every day is work day. I mean, you can't take holiday from football for a month and then come back and it's like, my God, what's happening? Everything is happening in a month. So it's like an every day, but just before the game is like injuries and things like that. Then you try to find stuff like that.
And how do you see the Swedish league compared to other European or Scandinavian leagues? I'm talking about skill level, budget,
The Swedish
for
league
example.
It's far away from the big leagues. It's I mean, I would say the Swedish, Denmark, and Norwegian league is pretty similar. I suppose if you ask a Dane, they would say Danish a little bit better. If you ask a Norwegian, they would say a little bit better. But it goes a little bit, but quite similar, I would say. Maybe you have one or two teams that do a little bit better some years, and then it's some other things like Copenhagen's been doing really well for a few years. Now it's been Malmö FF who's been doing really well for a couple of seasons, but we're struggling to keep up with the big leagues. They just getting more and more money, and you can see that the players that we maybe used to sell before, when it was to England, Italy, Germany, now it tends to be more, they have to go via Holland or Belgium or some smaller league and then try to prove themselves that way. So yeah, we're far off, but what we do have in Sweden is a culture of people go to the games. It's an incredible atmosphere. We have even people from England coming to Sweden now to enjoy the atmosphere, because we've taken the culture of singing from maybe England and, for example, South America, but you also do have the tifos from Italy. So it's like a mixture of everything. So when you go to a game, you kind of fool yourself it's better than it is, because the atmosphere around it is really, really nice. And when it comes to that, I would say by far we're the best in Scandinavia, because basically all the teams have quite a lot of following and a lot of people and a nice culture with that. So that's really nice. But the football itself, yeah, we're quite far away from the top leagues in Europe.
As you may know, in our first episode of this series, we talked with a colleague of yours, Jonas Schwartz, and he told us that during his childhood he used to watch the Premier League rather than its own national Danish league, due to its level in the 80s or in the 90s. Was it the same in your country or in your case?
Yeah. We grew up. My generation, we grew up with English football, because it was they started to show English football during the 70s, and every Saturday it was like a game, and you could bet around it. You had to do 13 games, and you try to make the right decision who won and who didn't. And during that time, it was Swedish. You couldn't watch Swedish football. So because they thought that basically the rule they have in England now, if it's a 3 o'clock kickoff in England, you're not allowed to show games on TV, because they think that people will not go. We had the same rule in Sweden, but then they took that away, and they realized quite quickly, what it did was the interest just grew. But yeah, I grew up on Premier League, so that's basically all Swedes. Norwegian and Danes have their favorites English team, because that's what they grew up with. The younger generation, they kind of started watching Italian football a lot in Sweden. My channel, TV3, we had a program called Uno Cruz Due. So every Sunday we show football from Italy, when the Serie A was the best league in the world. So a lot of people also have a Italian team that they support. So it's a bit weird especially in Scandinavia, that a lot of people have more love for English team or Italian team than they maybe have it for a team in Sweden. So for me, I grew up in a city where we didn't have a really good team. So, it was always easier for me. If you have your local team, then I think you start supporting that easily. But now English football is really, really huge in Sweden. That's by far the biggest TV rights to own. If you have Premier League, 10 years ago, we bought Premier League from a different company. Basically all day, what happened that day, the customers just called the other TV company and said, I want to quit, I want to quit, I want to quit. So, and they phoned us, we want to join. So it's huge. It's really, really big. So yeah, I agree with Jonas. It's English football is big.
And is it common in Sweden to watch or to know something about South American football?
It's quite difficult. I was thinking a little bit about prior to this interview that I think we love Brazil, Argentina, all that with the World Cup. It was very exciting before, because when the World Cup arrived, we didn't know who are these players. Obviously, I heard about Maradona, but I remember when I grew up and watching Brazil '82, it was like I didn't have a clue who those players were before. And then you see, and it's like, wow, they were great. But club football in South America is no. I think people know Boca Juniors, River Plate, and the rivalry, and it's like a physical league. But the problem, I think, is like it's for us in Europe difficult to understand the way your season is going with apertura, clausura, and it's like, how is that? I don't understand that. And then you change it a couple of years ago that no one could go out because you had to calculate the 3 seasons or whatever it was. Then it's like, okay, then it's difficult to keep up. I think it's a interest in South American football. I mean, obviously with Messi, and there's a lot of players from South America that comes to Europe, but the club football in itself, no, not much. They try to show it, but it's in the middle of the night. You have no connection with the club, so it's difficult. But South American football is big, but at the same time, the club football is small. I mean, we broadcast the qualifiers for the World Cup from South America, and a lot of people find that more interesting than the European qualifier, because there's so many games that before was really bad. I mean, Italy against Malta, it's like, it's how that's going to end up. In South America, it's really exciting. Copa America is big when we broadcast that, but that's the national team. That's interesting, but club football, I think it's difficult to find it fits in Sweden.
And you talk about Maradona in one moment. When Maradona died, for example, how was it for the football fans back in Sweden?
Shock. It was. I remember we were broadcasting for Champions League that day, and everybody went numb and sad, and then we just changed the whole program. Everything was about Maradona. we tried to call some ex-players. I was myself in contact with Gianfranco Zola, but he said, I can't talk about him today. I'm too sad. And it was like a lot of my colleagues and a lot of people, you should see the social media in Sweden. Everybody was just Maradona everywhere. And it was a bit like my childhood disappeared. For a lot of people in Sweden, he was the reason you start loving football. And I think he had a sense of humanity with him, because he had faults in his personality, which made him more likable in one sense, because you can identify with him. I was said to a colleague, I said, even as a journalist, I was if Maradona was shooting with me with a rifle, I was like, okay, it's Maradona. I would be all right with that. But if you have, for example, Messi, I mean, I don't know anything about Messi. He's like, he doesn't say anything, basically do one interview now and then. He's like, yeah, he's a great player, but I don't know anything about him. He's Maradona is like different era, I know, but it was something about him. He had personality on the pitch and off the pitch, and I think people could relate to that. And no, he's huge. He was really, really huge in Sweden, and that was a day you realized how much he meant to people in Sweden, the day he died, and it was a sad day for everyone.
Yeah, certainly. And how do you see Sweden's odds qualifying to the Qatar World Cup? To the ones hearing this episode, we would like to remember that Sweden takes part in the Group B along with Spain, Greece, Georgia, and Kosovo. And this is the second part of the question. We must ask you, and we would like to hear the Swedish journalist opinion regarding Zlatan Ibrahimovic possible comeback and the national team's success without him in qualifying in Russia 2018.
Well, if we start with qualifying for Qatar, it's going to be difficult. But at the same time, I'm very optimistic. We have a lot of young players coming through, like Kulusevski, who plays for Juventus, Alexander Isak, who is now in Real Sociedad. You have a guy called Svanberg, plays for Bologna. So there's a lot of young players coming up that's really interesting, and a different kind of players, maybe more flair players, creative. So exciting times in that sense. When it comes to Zlatan, yeah, well, he's been dividing a lot of people in Sweden in the last years. He decided to turn down the national team. He said, I don't want to play anymore. And well, the manager said, well, unless he says I want to play again, I'm just going to take it that he said no, thank you. And he was been on and off, and he was a bit flirting with coming back, and then it turned out it was more like a business thing than something else. But and Zlatan's been very critical of the Swedish national team, about the manager, saying all sort of things, and you kind of thought that, well, that's beyond repairable. But now Zlatan opened up and he said, I want to play in the national team. So the manager the next day took the flight to Milano, had a meeting with him and sat down, and they said, well, okay. And all the information we have, it was a good meeting. So I think he's going to turn up for the European Championship unless he's get injured. I think he has to accept that maybe he has a different role than he had before. But I mean, everyone is excited. I mean, it's by far Sweden's best player ever. And still he's 40 years old. He's scoring goals for AC Milan. He seems to be hungry. of course you want to have him in a national team, but he also has to understand that he has to do the dirty work as everyone else. Maybe they have to change a little bit, but the success we had in Russia was a team. Everybody was working the socks off for the team. It was everyone was talking about the team first, and bit of the old Swedish way to do it, tactical, work with each other, and a little bit of a luck. So we were all basically surprised when we went to the quarterfinal, but really happy with that. And now I think we have a nice mixture of that. Yeah, you work for your team, tactical approach, but some young players coming in can do that a little bit extra, and then maybe we can do a little bit more, play with a little bit more flair. And if you can get a player like Zlatan in, who can be that X factor, yeah, I think that would be great, and people will be really excited about it. So now I think it will be fun, and I think it would be good for Sweden as a whole, because there's been a lot of everywhere in the world problems with some racism and things like that. And if he could come along and maybe get everybody to turn up for and support the Swedish national team, and he could be a voice out, I think that would be great for everybody. So hopefully he will be in the team for Euros.
And we would like also to ask.
Sorry.
No, we would like also to ask you about this new qualifying system in Europe, as it has recently changed. So how do you see it? Perhaps it gives more odds to the big teams to qualify, or how do you see it?
It's a bit weird. I mean, I understand it in a sense, whether it's a national league, which is quite interesting. You get rid of some of the boring friendlies, but at the same time, it's quite complicated. So people say, well, okay, well, how does that work? If we win this, well, then you will qualify for this, or you have an extra chance with this one. So it's a bit confusing still, I think, for a lot of people to understand it. Myself struggling sometimes. You sit there, okay, how was it now? Could we always go into the Euro through this qualifier, or are we going the back way? But the good thing with this national league, the Nations League that they did, is that you don't have those boring games, because it's still the problem, I think, with international football, is that you have games where, I mean, England, Andorra. I mean, why do you want to watch that? I mean, I've been commentating games like that, and it's like after 3 minutes, it's 1-0. And okay, this game is over. You don't want to go and watch that. I mean, that's why I think the South American qualifiers tends to interest people in Europe, because we know everyone is tough. If you go to Bolivia, we know you're going to struggle. They worst team, but the conditions are what they are. You got Argentina, Brazil, you got Chile, you got so many countries, and the spaces are, well, the places are not that many, so it makes it interesting. So in that sense, it's good. I think and they had to do something, because the people, I don't want to say lost interest in the national team, but it get less coverage when you play teams that no one really care about. So, for example, last year Sweden was playing France, Portugal, Croatia. I mean, of course you want to go watch the best players in the world when they arrive. Now we had a pandemic, so it made sure we couldn't have any audience, but that's make it interesting instead of playing the lesser teams. I mean, obviously I understand that maybe French people didn't sincerely love watching Sweden maybe, but You got better games. I think the lesser teams also evolve when they play teams around them. Maybe they learn to try to play themselves instead of just defend. So we will see. Give it time, but in the long run, I think it's a good idea for the international football.
What do you think about youth development and scouting in Sweden? Can you tell us a young talent who we will see in one of the top European leagues?
So difficult. I would say that the ones most fascinating now, what people talk about, is obviously Kulusevski, who plays for Juventus. He has a lot of things going for him. That's an interesting young player. Who else do we have? I think Swanberg, as I mentioned before, could be interesting. He's a bit older, but he's developing slowly. But Alexander Isak, also a young player, then under 21s. There are a few, but I think it's so difficult to say, because sometimes they do really well in the Swedish league and everybody's get really excited, and then they go abroad and it's like, okay, it's a tough competition out there, because all of a sudden you compete with the rest of the world. But I think we have a lot of young players coming through, and different kind of players than we used to have. I mean, we maybe used to have hardworking, tactical knowledge, solid players. Now we tend to, much thanks to Zlatan, young players want to be creative. They want to dribble. They want to challenge. They want to do different things. But at the same time, they learn how to be tactical aware. I mean, I would say a little bit like Argentina in that sense, because Argentina is a bit of both flair and hard work and tactical. So interesting in that sense. There's been a lot of changes in Sweden, because a couple of years ago, we started to have AstroTurf on a lot of places, and I don't like AstroTurf when it's played on the top level, but for youth, it's really good, because the climate here is not really good for football all year round. -6 degrees at the moment. About this much snow outside my door at the moment. But if you then can have AstroTurf heating under, then you can play all the time, and that helps develop new players. So it's interesting. I think it's interesting. So yeah, I think we are on a good path, on new talents coming through. So yeah, but I would say if you in Argentina, you don't know much about Swedish football, Alexander Isak and Dejan Kulusevski, I would say those are the most exciting players at the moment. I probably forgot someone now, but they are the one who comes to mind.
Okay, and for our last question, as we are
Zlatan, he's forever young.
Yeah, sure. And for our last question, as we have less than 5 minutes remaining of this meeting, we would like to ask you, what do you think about video assistant referee? One of the most controversial topics nowadays, isn't it?
Oh, you need to extend the meeting. I was actually, first I was against it, but then more I learned about it, I was for it. The problem in Europe, I would say, is that most people watch football from England, and England messed it up big time. They really messed up more, because first they decided not to use it for 2 years. They said they want to wait and see all the mistakes the other one was doing, so they would make it right. So they were waiting, and then they make special rules, and it just hasn't worked. They messed things up really, really badly. So the frustration is huge. And I can tell, for example, in Sweden, people hate VAR. I think used correctly is a good tool, because some people say, well, we always just, the only thing we discuss now is referee. I was like, stop it. We were discussing referees before as much as we do now, but in a different way. And for me, I mean, if they say clear and obvious, I mean, they have to just adapt. And if you look at, I've been reading a lot about rugby, cricket. We have ice hockey in Sweden where they have kind of that use it. It takes some time to get used to it. It's going to be some flaws. You have referees who are not used to it. You have maybe, I think, a system where you should have the old referees who's not allowed to be on the field anymore. They should be in the video assistant, because you don't have the competition. I mean, people forget there's a competition among referees. Everyone wants to be in the World Cup. Everyone wants to referee the Champions League final. Well, if you're not best in your country, you're not going to go there. And say, for instance, you have two referees, and those are the best two. All of a sudden, you have one guy sitting in the video room and say, well, I think you should look at this. And this guy maybe feel, well, I don't trust him. Maybe he just wants to make me look bad. So you have things like that that you maybe not think of that much. But two referees that hate each other, all of a sudden they have to work together. And so I think the rules, also, some of the rules are not applied to be looked at for video. So they tried to change that, and now they changed too many rules. So people's like, I know when I commentate, I was like, hands rule, I don't know. It's like, what is handball today? I don't think anyone knows. And I asked referees, international referees, and it's like, well, I'm not sure why I would put hands there. I was like, see, you got, and I remember one guy, a referee, where was a thing in Champions League, and I said, what do you think? And he said, hang on. And he asked all his colleagues, referees from all over Europe, and he said, it's 4 against 4-4. So I said, well, how the hell should I know then? It's like, not even international referees can match. But I think VAR is here to stay. We can't go back, because I think that will make it even worse, because everybody has video. You watch on you can sit on the stand, you watch on the mobile. It's like, how the referee didn't see that. But I think we need to find a way to use it only when it's really, really necessary, not an armpit offside or things like that. And hopefully we will get there with a year or two. That's my hope. But I think we have to realize it's here to stay.